What if a president dreamed of his own death just days before it happened? Not a vague feeling, not a superstition, but a vivid, detailed vision of his own funeral inside the White House. That's exactly what happened to Abraham Lincoln just 1 week before he was assassinated at Ford's Theater. And tonight, you're going to hear the strange, haunting, and eerily prophetic dream that still gives historians chills. Was it coincidence, intuition, or something deeper? Close your eyes. Let's return to the final days of a man who carried the weight of a nation and seemed to know exactly how his story would end. It was early April 1865. After 4 long, bloody years, the American Civil War was finally coming to an end. General Robert E. Lee had surrendered at Appomattox. The Union was preserved. In cities across the North, crowds filled the streets to celebrate. But inside the White House, President Abraham Lincoln was tired. Not just physically, though the war had aged him dramatically, but spiritually. He had led the nation through its darkest hour. And now, in the quiet aftermath, he found himself restless. Lincoln had always been a man drawn to dreams. He read poetry. He pondered omens. Those closest to him knew that when he had a strong feeling or a vivid dream, he took it seriously. And then one night, just a few days after the war's end, he had a dream, one unlike any he had ever experienced before. The next morning, as sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the executive mansion, Lincoln's face was pale, thoughtful. He turned to his wife, Mary Todd, and told her what he had seen. In the dream, he was walking through the White House. The rooms were dim, silent. As he moved from hall to hall, he noticed something strange. There were guards posted at every door. Their heads were bowed, their expressions solemn. He heard soft sobbing. A hush hung over the air, heavy and unnatural. Finally, he entered the East Room, one of the largest in the White House, and there, surrounded by mourners, was a coffin, an open casket, draped in the American flag. He asked one of the soldiers nearby, "Who is dead in the White House?" The soldier answered the president. He was killed by an assassin. Lincoln said he then awoke in a cold sweat. Mary Todd, who had long feared for her husband's life, was shaken. She begged him not to go out that evening. She reminded him how many threats had been made. She warned him that not all wounds in America had healed, that not everyone celebrated the Union victory. But Lincoln, ever calm, brushed it off. "It's just a dream," he said, and yet he told others, several members of his cabinet, a few close friends. Even his bodyguard, Ward Hill Layman, recalled being told about the strange dream just days before the assassination. Abraham Lincoln had always lived with one foot in the world of the living and the other in something deeper, a place of poetry, prophecy, and quiet dread. He believed in signs, in strange, flickering truths that hovered just beyond reason, and this would not be the first time he felt the cold breath of fate at his shoulder. Long before that final dream, Abraham Lincoln had experienced a series of strange, unsettling visions. They weren't just passing images in the night. They were vivid, symbolic, and often too specific to ignore. One of the earliest came shortly after his election in 1860. He had been sitting alone, looking into a mirror by candlelight, when something unusual caught his eye. In the reflection, he saw 2 images of himself. One, his usual self, upright, strong. The other was pale, almost ghostly. A second, Lincoln, washed out and deathly white. Startled, he sat back. The second image faded. He tried again. And once more, the pale version appeared beside his real face. He told Mary about it. She went still, her voice quiet. She believed it meant he would be elected to a second term, but would not live to complete it. Lincoln laughed it off at the time, but deep down he remembered it. As the years passed, death circled him constantly. The Civil War consumed the nation. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers perished. Lincoln signed orders, read casualty reports, and visited hospitals with amputated limbs stacked in corners. And yet, for all the national suffering, his deepest pains were personal. His beloved son, Willie, just 11 years old, died of typhoid fever in the White House in 1862. Lincoln was devastated. He would walk alone at night, sobbing softly through the halls of the executive mansion. Sometimes he sat by Willie's sealed tomb for hours, whispering as though the boy could still hear him. Grief never left him after that. Friends said it changed him, that the brightness in his eyes dimmed, that his voice grew slower, that he often seemed to be listening to something no one else could hear. It was as though he had become a man, already half gone, tethered to the world by duty, not desire. He started talking more openly about premonitions. He once told his friend Joshua Speed that he had always believed he would die suddenly and violently, not by old age or illness, but by the hand of another. That belief didn't make him paranoid, it made him calm. He would joke about it, tease his guards, walk the streets of Washington alone at night, even though dozens of threats had been made against his life. To Lincoln, death wasn't something to be feared. It was a companion, a presence he had grown used to, perhaps even a fate already sealed. As Lincoln moved through his final weeks, his outward demeanor seemed lighter, even joyful at times, but those closest to him noticed something else, a kind of peaceful detachment, as if he had accepted something no one else fully understood. He began speaking in strange metaphors, reflective and poetic. To one close friend, he said, "It's been 4 long years. I feel like I've been on a great ship caught in a terrible storm. Now the skies are clearing. I can see the shore. That shore may have been the Union's survival." Or maybe he was talking about something else. The weight of war had drained him, but victory gave him a kind of release. He even spoke of travel, of leaving Washington behind, visiting California, or returning to Illinois with Mary to live a quiet life. But others sensed it too. His wife described how he seemed unusually affectionate in those final days, taking longer walks with her, holding her hand more often, speaking gently and slowly, like someone who wanted to remember every moment. One evening, just days before his assassination, Lincoln attended a cabinet meeting. He looked around the table and said quietly, "There's something strange. I feel as if I shall never be here again." The room fell silent. The men shifted awkwardly in their seats. They had seen Lincoln under unimaginable pressure through war tragedy and loss, but never like this, never so sure, never so resigned. He had also begun to discuss death more often and more openly, not in fear, but in curiosity. To some, it seemed like the president was standing in a doorway between worlds, glancing back and gently preparing to step through. And then came the day that would become one of the most unforgettable in American history. April 14th, 1865, Good Friday. Lincoln awoke that morning in unusually good spirits. He laughed with his staff. He greeted visitors warmly. He told a few old stories, the kind of slow, winding tales that made everyone in the room lean in. At lunch, he shared a moment of quiet joy with Mary. "I haven't felt this happy in years," he told her. She smiled, relieved. The war was over. The worst had passed. That night they would attend a play at Ford's Theater, a light comedy called Our American Cousin. A well-earned break from 4 years of darkness. What neither of them knew was that someone else would also be attending that night. A man whose mind had been twisted by hatred. A man who had already decided this would be the president's last evening alive. That evening, the presidential carriage made its way through the streets of Washington, rattling gently over cobblestones as gas lamps flickered in the cool April air. Inside sat Abraham Lincoln and his wife Mary, along with 2 guests, Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée Clara Harris. The mood in the carriage was light. Lincoln spoke softly, his deep voice calm, his long hands resting on his knees. When they arrived at Ford's Theater, a cheering crowd had already gathered. Word had spread that the president would be attending. The atmosphere was festive, one of relief, of celebration. The war was over. The nation was healing. At around 8:30 p.m., the play began. Lincoln took his seat in the presidential box above the audience, draped in flags. The mood was cheerful. He leaned back in his chair, enjoying the actors' performances. But among the audience that night was a man named John Wilkes Booth. A famous stage actor himself, Booth was known for his charisma and for his intense hatred of Lincoln. To Booth, Lincoln wasn't a hero, he was a tyrant. And in Booth's mind, killing the president would make him a legend, the man who avenged the South. He knew the theater well. He had performed there many times, and more importantly, he knew the layout, the corridors, the box seats, the exact timing of the play's funniest moments when the audience's laughter would cover the sound of a gunshot. Shortly after 10 p.m., Booth slipped through the back of the theater and climbed the stairs to the president's box. He carried with him a small Derringer pistol, easily concealed, and a dagger. He waited just behind the door. On stage, the actors delivered one of the play's biggest punchlines. The audience erupted with laughter. Lincoln smiled. At that exact moment, Booth opened the door. He stepped into the box, raised his pistol, and fired a single shot. The bullet struck the back of Lincoln's head. Mary screamed. Major Rathbone lunged at Booth, who slashed him with the dagger and leapt over the railing to the stage below, breaking his leg as he landed. Still, Booth managed to shout his final defiant words to the shocked audience, "Sic semper tyrannis thus," always to tyrants. He limped away through the backstage exit and into the night. In the box above, Abraham Lincoln slumped in his chair, blood soaking into his collar. He was still alive, barely, but unconscious, motionless. His long journey was coming to an end, just as he had dreamed. As the gaslights in Ford's theater flickered, chaos unfolded. Screams rose from the audience. People surged toward the exits. Actors froze on stage, unsure if the gunshot was part of the play. Mary Todd Lincoln collapsed in shock, clutching her husband's arm, crying out his name. Soldiers and doctors rushed to the presidential box. But one look at Lincoln told them the truth. He would not survive the night. They couldn't take him back to the White House. The bumpy carriage ride would almost certainly kill him. So they carried his body ever so carefully across the street to a small boarding house, the Peterson House. They laid him on a simple bed that was too short for his long frame. His boots were removed. His coat was opened. Blood had matted the back of his hair. All through the night, doctors came and went. They tried what they could, but medicine in 1865 was primitive. There were no CT scans, no brain surgery, no real hope. They simply watched and waited. Outside, crowds began to gather. Word had spread quickly. Candles lit up the street. Men stood in silence. Women held each other and wept. The atmosphere had shifted from celebration to mourning. Inside, at Lincoln's bedside, government officials and friends remained. His son, Tad Lincoln, was kept away. He was just 12 years old. Mary, inconsolable, wept in the next room. At one point, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton whispered, "If he must die, he should die in dignity." And so they kept vigil. Lincoln's breathing grew shallower. His pulse weakened. His lips, once known for stories and speeches, no longer moved. And then at 7:22 a.m., on April 15th, 1865, Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States, took his final breath. There was silence. And then Stanton spoke again, this time for all to hear. "Now he belongs to the ages." Those words would echo through time, a solemn farewell to the man who saved the Union and dreamed of his own death just days before it came. But even in death, Lincoln's journey wasn't over. Because what followed next, the funeral, the train, the grieving nation, would become one of the most profound and unifying moments in American memory. Abraham Lincoln's death cast a long, dark shadow across the nation. News traveled fast by telegraph and word of mouth. Bells tolled in cities and towns. Newspapers ran black-bordered headlines. People wept openly in the streets, not just in the North, but even in parts of the South. The war had ended. The Union had survived. But its leader, the man who had carried it through the storm, was gone. The body of the president was embalmed, dressed in black, and placed in a coffin beneath a canopy of black crepe and velvet. His face was pale but peaceful, almost as if he had simply fallen asleep, just as his dream had foretold. An elaborate funeral procession was planned, but this would be no simple burial. Lincoln's body would be carried by train in a slow, solemn journey from Washington, D.C. to his hometown of Springfield, Illinois. A total of 654 miles across 7 states and 180 cities, retracing in reverse the route he had taken to the Capitol 4 years earlier as president-elect. It became known as the Lincoln Funeral Train. Every stop along the way became a moment of national mourning. In Philadelphia, his coffin was placed in the same hall where the Declaration of Independence had been signed. In New York City, over 150,000 people stood in silence as the casket passed by, flanked by soldiers and mourners dressed in black. In town after town, citizens lined the tracks. Some knelt, some saluted, some simply stood with hats over their hearts, watching the slow-moving train pass by as if watching the final breath of an era. Children were lifted onto shoulders. Elderly veterans saluted through tears. Choirs sang hymns in the fading light. For many Americans, this was the first time they had ever mourned a president. And for nearly all, it felt personal. Because Abraham Lincoln wasn't just a leader. He had become a symbol of something larger, of endurance, of justice, of the high cost of peace. As the train moved westward, people left tokens along the rails, flowers, flags, handwritten notes. In one town, a mother held up her infant and whispered, "That is the man who saved your country." By the time the funeral train reached Springfield, Lincoln's home was covered in black drapery. The town had gone silent, and there finally the man who had dreamed of his death, who had lived in sorrow, led through war, and died in peace, was laid to rest. In the quiet cemetery in Springfield, Illinois, Abraham Lincoln was buried beneath a gray sky, surrounded by family soldiers and citizens from every corner of the fractured nation he helped to heal. But his story didn't end with the closing of the tomb. Almost immediately, people began to speak of him, not just as a president, but as a martyr. His death, so sudden, so symbolic, seemed to lift him into a different realm. Like Julius Caesar, like Martin Luther King Jr. decades later. He had become more than a man. He had become a myth. Writers, painters, and poets tried to capture his spirit. Songs were written, sermons were preached, monuments were planned, and through it all, one strange detail kept resurfacing. A detail that haunted those who had heard it before. It happened. The dream of his own death. The East Room, the coffin draped in flags, the soldier whispering, "The president, he was killed by an assassin." Many began to wonder, had Lincoln somehow known? Some believed it was mere coincidence, the kind that history is full of eerie only in hindsight. Others believed it revealed something deeper, that Lincoln, with his poet's soul and mournful eyes, was in tune with something beyond the physical. That he had seen a glimpse of his own ending, not as a warning, but as a preparation. Even today, historians and psychologists debate what such a dream means. Was it intuition? Was it a mind under constant stress, playing out its darkest fears? Or was it, as some quietly believe, a visitation from fate? Whatever the cause, the result is undeniable. Lincoln's final days were marked not by dread, but by a calm acceptance. His words were softer, his gaze more distant. It was as if he had already walked the path ahead of him in his sleep. And when the moment arrived, he simply followed it. Years passed. The nation rebuilt itself slowly, painfully through the scars of war. The memory of Lincoln became not just a part of history, but a presence in American life. His face would be carved into stone, his words etched into monuments, his legacy taught in every classroom, remembered in every time the country struggled to stay united. But behind all the speeches, statues, and ceremonies, there lingers something quieter, something deeper. A story of a man exhausted, grieving, burdened, who dreamed of his death and did not run from it. That dream still echoes more than 150 years later, because it wasn't just about a death. It was about a man who sensed the weight of destiny, who carried it with grace, and who found peace not in survival, but in sacrifice. Lincoln's life was filled with sorrow, but also extraordinary strength. His laughter masked pain, his poetry hid prophecy, and his final act to attend a play with his wife on a warm April night was a quiet choosing of light in the face of darkness. He never wanted to be a martyr, but in some ways he became one the moment he accepted that some dreams are not just dreams. They are truths whispered ahead of time for those willing to listen. So tonight as you drift to sleep, remember this. Sometimes the past doesn't shout. It whispers through symbols, through dreams, through the final silent choices of those who walked before us. And if you listen closely, you just might hear the echo of Abraham Lincoln's footsteps, still walking that quiet hallway, toward a door he always knew was waiting. If this story moved you, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel for more powerful history told softly. Drop a comment. Do you believe in prophetic dreams? Or was Lincoln simply a man who understood his moment too well? And don't forget, we'll see you in the next video with another forgotten story that just might change the way you see the world. Good night, and keep the candle of curiosity burning.